the last thing that we're going to talk about today is Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9. Okay, same Daniel. A little bit later, we've got a different king right now, but it's the same Daniel. Okay, so in chapter 9, he tells about this incredible experience where an angel named Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, comes to visit him and gives him this incredible prophecy about when the Messiah is going to come. All right, so let's dive into this. All right, so Daniel says, while I was still speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God, while I was still speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, who is an angel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. And he instructed me and talked with me and said, Daniel, I have come now to give you insight with understanding. At the beginning of your pleas, the command was issued, and I have come to tell you because you are highly esteemed. So pay attention to the message and gain understanding of the vision. Can you imagine an angel coming and telling you you are highly esteemed? Wow. Okay, so here is the prophecy. Now I'm going to just go through it. It's kind of confusing at first, but then we're going to pull it apart. So I think it'll make sense when we really dig into it. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the wrongdoing, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for guilt, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy place. So what's he talking about there? When was atonement for guilt made? He's talking about the Messiah. Okay, so he's talking about that 70 weeks have been decreed for all of this stuff to take place in order for the Messiah to come. Okay, the next he says, so you are to know and understand from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with streets. Jerusalem will be built again with streets and moat, even in times of distress. Okay, so what is he saying here? He says he's giving Daniel a marker. He says, from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So this is his marker. So he says, when this decree to rebuild Jerusalem, when this happens, that is our first marker. And then after that, so this is a marker, so we'll know we start counting now so that we will know when the Messiah is going to come. Okay, so from this marker, we will have 7 weeks and 62 weeks, okay? And then at the end of that time period will be the Messiah, the Prince. Okay, does that make sense? We're gonna get into this even more, so it'll be clear. All right. Then after the 62 weeks, so this is after the Messiah has come, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the Prince who is to come and will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like the language that Jesus used in Matthew 24 to talk about the tribulation? Okay, that I believe he was talking about the AD 70 when Jerusalem was destroyed. Same language. I think he's talking about the same thing. He's talking about the destruction of the temple. And he will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come the one who makes desolate, until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, gushes forth on the one who makes desolate. Okay, now, of course, again, the premillennialists think all this is talking about this coming tribulation in the future. But I believe, and I'm going to show you, I've got charts. I'm going to show you in some charts, so it should be very, very clear. I believe this is all talking right here about AD 70, when the temple was destroyed, Jerusalem was destroyed. Okay, so all of this, I believe, has already happened. That is the partial preterist view of this. Okay. All right, so let's see. So here is the beginning. Okay, so let's talk about what this means. 70 weeks. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people. Okay, for all of this time of God's favor before the Messiah can come. Okay, so according to the prophetic language that was used at the time, it is agreed by everybody that knows anything about this that the 70 weeks, that within the 70 weeks, 1 day equals 1 year. Okay. So 1 day equals 1 year. So if you take 70 weeks and you multiply that by 7 days, because there's 7 days in a week, that gives you 490 years. 490 years. So what Gabriel is saying is that that there's going to be 490 years, that all of this is going to take place. The beginning marker is this, when the decree is issued to rebuild Jerusalem, from that time period, there's going to be 490 years until the end of all of this, the atonement is made, okay? So Gabriel's predicting 490 years of God's favor on the Israelites. All right. So, and here's our marker: from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. Now he breaks it down. There will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Okay. So what does that mean? Here's what that looks like. Okay. So we've got these 490 years, but it's broken into 3 sections. Okay. We've got 7 weeks, 49 years, and 62 weeks, 434 years. Okay. So what he's saying is the first, 7 weeks and then 62 weeks. So that adds up to 483 years. Okay, so from the beginning marker, the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, okay, from that until the end, 483 years, then the Messiah will come. To 483 years. Then after the Messiah comes, there's 1 more week. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, and that's 7 years. Does it make sense? Okay, so did we get this decree to rebuild Jerusalem? Indeed, we did, in a miraculous way. Okay, so this happened in 457 BC, and the Jewish people, the Israelites, were still in captivity. Only it was no longer Babylon, because Babylon had been defeated now by the Medo-Persians. Okay, so we got a new king. He is a Persian king. This is King Artaxerxes. Okay, and this is in 457 BC. Artaxerxes, in a miraculous way, made a decree that some of the Israelites could go back to Jerusalem to rebuild Jerusalem. Something like that is never heard of. So when we learn about this in the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah, and that's indeed what happened. So this group of Israelites were able to go back and start rebuilding Jerusalem, and it took them 49 years to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. Okay, and so that's why you have it divided into 7, the 7 weeks, and then I can't remember, 42 weeks, whatever it was. Okay, so we've got 483 years from this decree in 457 BC until, according to Gabriel's prophecy, that's when the Messiah is supposed to come. What does that take us to? It takes us to AD 27. Do you know what happened in AD 27? That is when Jesus was baptized and he started his ministry. This is incredible. Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, gave a prophecy that was accurate to the very year that the Messiah came. Gabriel gave a prophecy about something that was going to happen almost 500 years in the future, to the very year. In fact, this was so unbelievably accurate that for a long time, Bible scholars suspected, they thought that maybe the book of Daniel, that this part of the book of Daniel was written after Jesus came, because they couldn't believe that it could have been so accurate. But then when they found it, they found the Dead Sea Scrolls and found evidence that no, this was really written before Jesus came. It's so incredible. The more you study the Bible, the more you are convinced that there's no way this was written by mere men. It is so amazingly, incredibly accurate. All the many prophecies that were fulfilled in just tiny details. So anyway, and this is one of them. All right, so let's talk about how premillennialists see this and how partial preterists see this. Okay, and we're getting to the very end here. All right, let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is the way the premillennialists see all this. So first of all, the premillennialists and the partial preterists, we agree about the whole first part of this. So we agree about the first 483 years. We agree with the marker of the King Artaxerxes. We agree that at the end of the 483 years that Jesus's ministry started. Okay, so yay, we agree about all that stuff. But you know what happened? Like normal, the premillennialists have put a huge gap in the middle between the end of the 483 years and that one remaining week. That is known as Daniel's 70th week. And they think that there's this big 200 plus year gap in between. You can see in the middle there, it says church age unknown to Daniel. That there's this huge gap between that very last week, because according to the prophecy, that this indicates God's favor. And so, all right, let me keep on going. Okay, so they say church age unknown to Daniel, but you know what? It wasn't unknown to God when he gave the prophecy to Gabriel to give to Daniel. Okay, so this is what they say. Now, what do the what do the partial preterists believe? Okay, so we don't see any gap, of course. This is how it always goes. The millennialists think there's a big gap, and the partial preterists say, no, there's no gap. That's always our big argument. Okay, so here we agree all the way to 27 AD, and when Jesus is baptized and starts his ministry. Okay, then we think that week, that 7 years, that it starts immediately after that. Let me show you some really good proof. Okay, so Gabriel says this. Okay, he's talking about, this is what we've just read, and Gabriel is talking about that last week, Daniel's 70th week, okay? And so here's what he says. And he will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, okay, for 1 week, this is our 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come the one who makes desolate, until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, gushes forth on the one who makes desolate. So what is this? He's got that last week, and he says it's going to be split in half. So if you take 7 years, that's 1 week, 7 years, and you split it in half, you have 3.5 years, and you have 3.5 years. Okay, so that Daniel's 70th week is split in the middle, 3.5 years, 3.5 years. Okay, so here is what the premillennialist believe about that 3.5 year split. Now, remember, they think there's this huge gap, and they think that 7 year period, that last week, Daniel's 70th week, they think that's the tribulation that's going to happen in the future. And so they have this whole story. That's where they get the 7 years from, this prophecy from Gabriel. Okay, so then they have this whole story they've developed where they split it in half. Okay, they believe that where it says he in this verse says he will confirm a covenant, okay, with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to this sacrifice. They think he is talking about the Antichrist, but the Antichrist has not been mentioned at all in any of this prophecy. Okay, and so they believe that in the first 3.5 years, the temple is going to be rebuilt in Jerusalem, and then this is God's favors coming back on the Jews. They're going to start sacrificing again, which that doesn't make sense to me, because why would they do that if they recognize the Messiah? So I don't know. But then in the middle, 3.5 years split, the Antichrist is supposed to go into the temple and desecrate the temple, and then he is going to stop the sacrifices. Okay, that's what they say. That's the premillennialist view of this. Okay, here is what the partial preterists believe. All right, so the 483 years stops. It ends at when Jesus is baptized and his ministry starts, right? And then we've got 1 more year, okay, which is 7 years. 1 more week, which is 7 years. Sorry, it's so confusing. Okay, how long was Jesus's ministry? It was 3.5 years. It was 3.5 years, okay? So that's half of that week. So we've got 7 years divided into 2, 3.5 years, 3.5 years. What happened at the end of the 3.5 years, at the end of Jesus's ministry? He was crucified, right? Okay, so now let's go back and let's look at this verse. So when Gabriel says he's talking about the Messiah. He's not talking about the Antichrist. So the verse before this is talking about the Messiah. So if in context, he is talking about the Messiah. And he, Jesus, will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week, for 7 years. But in the middle of the week, after 3.5 years, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. So what happened after 3.5 years? Jesus was crucified. When Jesus was crucified, then he stopped. His blood was the new covenant. So the old covenant was stopped. So the sacrifices and the grain offerings were stopped because that is the old covenant. To me, it's like so clear. This is so clear that it's talking about Jesus. Okay, so but then we still have that 3.5 years, the leftover 3.5 years after Jesus is crucified. So what is that talking about? Okay, so here's what that means. So Jesus was crucified, rose again, went back up to heaven. So 3.5 years after that, Stephen was stoned. Okay, you know that story? Stephen was the first Christian martyr. Okay, so that is the end of that Daniel's 70th week. That is the end of the 490 years that Gabriel was prophesying. That is the end of the time period of God's showing this favor of giving salvation to the the Jewish people first, because God gave salvation. He offered salvation to the Jews first and then to the Gentiles. So that shift, the end of that, was when Stephen was stoned. Stephen had just given a very clear message of the gospel, and he was rejected by the Pharisees, by the high priest, the Jewish high priest, and they stoned him to death. And right after that, now you know who was there? Saul was there. Saul, who then later converted and became Paul. Okay, so Saul was there. He actually held the coats of the people who stoned Stephen to death. Okay. And then right after that, Saul, had his Damascus Road experience where he met Jesus and he was converted and became a Christian, became Paul. And then God sent him to the Gentiles. Okay. And about that same time, Apostle Peter, he had his vision in which this sheet came down with all of these unclean animals that Jewish people weren't supposed to eat. And God said in the vision, eat. Okay, and that signified that now salvation is open to the Gentiles, because don't call anything that God has created unclean. Okay, so all that happened at the same time, signifying the shift that these 490 years of favor of salvation being offered to the Jews, this is ending now. Now is the time when God is offering salvation to the Gentiles. So that is the way that partial preterists see Gabriel's prophecy. Does that make sense? I think this is amazing stuff. I think this is incredible.